Imagine watching this event take place right in front of your very eyes. Go into a market and placing a bet on it, then losing that bet because secretly, behind closed doors, there was a group of people who get to decide what's true, not based on the evidence in front of them, but based on how much money they have. Or how about betting on a market only to have someone change the rules after the bets are already placed? This is what's happening right now in major betting markets across the globe with hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. This market says the president's own words aren't evidence that he made a phone call. This one about the government shutdown quietly had its rules amended after people had already bet. And once you see who benefits from these decisions, it starts to feel a lot less like prediction and a lot more like a scam. The platform behind these bets is called Polymarket, and it's part of a fast-growing industry known as prediction markets. These are places where people can bet on real-world events with odds that are supposed to reflect what's most likely to happen. In theory, money flows towards the truth. But the system only works if the rules are clear before people bet and they don't change after the bets are placed. Let's start with this one, the US government shutdown market. This market said it would resolve to yes if the government shut down. But the exact wording here really matters. This market will resolve to yes if the U.S. Office of Personnel Management announces another federal government shutdown by January 31st, 2026. It also clarifies that a partial shutdown counts as a shutdown and that the official resolution source is OPM's operating status page. Now that's pretty straightforward. If the OPM website announces a federal government shutdown, even a partial one, the market resolves to yes. Now, by the time this market had reached the deadline, about $107 million had been wagered on the outcome. This wasn't some surprise event. News about the potential shutdown that had been going around for weeks, and the deadline was well known, so most of the large money in this market was positioned on the yes side. Then that Saturday arrived, and the OPM website posted this update. Status: due to a partial lapse in appropriations, federal government operations vary by agency. That language doesn't say shutdown. It doesn't say partial shutdown. It very carefully avoids both. So 24 hours before this market is closed, when most of the money is already placed on yes, they decided to amend the rules and add this clarification. Due to a partial lapse in appropriations, qualifies as an announcement of a partial shutdown. And with that clarification, the outcome became an inevitable yes. Now, you can call it whatever you want to, but the government was in a partial shutdown. It really was. There wasn't enough money to pay the bills. Our Congress hadn't signed the right laws. But should Polymarket change the rules after a market already starts, when millions of dollars are already on the line? Now that's another question entirely. Hey, if you appreciate all the research that went into this video, you can pay me back in less than 3 seconds by just clicking that like button down below. Helps my video out a ton and I really appreciate it. If you want more content like this also, hit the subscribe button right next to it. But either way, the precedent is now set. When the language is unclear, Polymarket is willing to interpret it to reach what it believes is the truth. But this outcome just happened to line up with the whales and their positions. Now let's look at what happens when the same ambiguity points the other direction. This is a different market that looks at whether Donald Trump talked to Vladimir Putin in January. Now, according to the rules, it's supposed to resolve to yes if Vladimir Putin talks with Donald Trump between January 1st and January 31st. A talk is defined as any interaction in person or by phone or video call, and the resolution source is a consensus of credible reporting. Now listen to this clip.
It's not just like cold, it's extraordinary cold, record-setting cold. Over there too, they're having the same releases. And I personally asked President Putin not to fire. A lot of people said, don't waste the coal, you're not going to get that. And he did it, and we're very happy that they did it.
Trump's own words. I personally asked President Putin. People said don't waste the call. The president just told the world that he called Putin. And he ties that call to record-setting extreme cold. Multiple outlets reported on this, and the Kremlin even confirmed this interaction. But despite that, the voters who decided this market had two big arguments. First, they didn't think Trump explicitly said the date in the call, so maybe it happened in December. And second, Trump can't be trusted as a source. Okay, is President Trump psychic? Can he predict record-setting extreme cold a month in advance? How could he possibly know about the weather a month ago? And Trump can't be trusted as a source. Look, I may not trust him for everything, but who he called, yeah, I think he knows that. So to clarify this and make sure that the market resolved in an honest way, Polymarket did nothing. As one user said,
"It's pure fraud. This would be the perfect story to explain what's really going on here. The entire dispute protocol is hijacked by whales and is basically just a tool to fleece the participants."
Inconsistency matters. In the government shutdown market, ambiguous language, well, that was clarified to reach what Polymarket believed was obvious real-world outcome. But in this market, the big money was on the other side, and the whales won. Look, I want to be 100% clear. In all of these markets, I lost money. Yes, I had real-world bets placed on the wrong side in each of these, and I'm not alone. Yahoo Finance recently reported that only 30% of the 1.7 million trading addresses on Polymarket have turned a profit, and fewer than 0.04% captured over 70% of the profits, totaling $3.7 billion. And that's because Polymarket isn't designed to consistently find the truth. In fact, you won't believe how it finds an outcome and who benefits from this. But before I tell you that, I need to just show you how flawed and inconsistent this system is. This market didn't say, unless we think the speaker exaggerates. It didn't say, unless we distrust this person. It said one thing, a consensus of credible reporting. This was covered in the BBC, Guardian, a New York Times reporter confirmed additional details, the Times of India, Fox News, New York Post, the Journal, the Straits Times, plus many more. But somehow that wasn't a consensus of reporting, and it's actually pretty common for a market to resolve based on a consensus of reporting. Normally, they just take official government releases as truth. Just look at this market, asking whether U.S. personnel directly participated on the ground in anti-cartel operations in Mexico. Now, just like that Trump-Putin market, it relies on official statements or an overwhelming consensus of reporting. In January, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum publicly stated many times that she and President Trump had agreed to rule out U.S. military ground intervention. She emphasized that any actions on Mexican territory would be carried out by Mexican forces. But this market went the other way. Why? Because Kash Patel posted a tweet on X claiming that a drug lord had been arrested as part of a joint on-the-ground operation between U.S. and Mexican forces. That single statement was enough. In one market, a president's sitting words followed by countless news outlets isn't trusted. In another, a single tweet from Kash Patel, well, that's enough. Same administration, same market requirements, completely different standards. These markets don't resolve consistently. They resolve selectively. And it turns out how much money you have influences what outcomes you're going to see. Because Polymarket doesn't even resolve their own disputes. They rely on a token called UMA to do it for them. Here's how UMA works. When there's a disagreement about how a market should resolve, people vote. But of course, it's not one person, one vote. Your voting power is based on how many tokens you're willing to put up. The more tokens you stake, the more influence you have over the outcomes. As one user said,
"Silly peasants. The truth of what happens doesn't matter. Read the rules. It's about who can spend the most money to verify what's true."
If voters agree with the majority, they get more tokens once the vote is over. If they vote against the herd, they lose tokens. So they're not really voting on what happened. They're betting on which outcome will win the vote. UMA doesn't ask what actually happened. It asks who's willing to spend the most money to confirm what happened. And those confirmations, well, they decide how multi-million-dollar markets swing. I'm not saying this is some intentional corruption, and I don't think there's a bunch of people sitting around in a dark room deciding all the outcomes. But when you watch how these whales behave in these markets, they sure seem to move together, and it works in their favor an awful lot of the time. And the reason is the design. UMA's system pushes voters toward agreement. And because voting power increases with the number of tokens you hold, it becomes financially smart to align your vote with the whales. Thousands and thousands of markets resolve correctly every day without any disputes. You can't manipulate indisputable things like who won the Super Bowl. But Polymarket relies on UMA to resolve a lot of fringe cases. And in those cases, wherever the big money goes, the other votes tend to follow. Not because anybody's corrupt, but because it's in their financial interests. So without any shady deals or anyone breaking the rules, these markets naturally resolve in favor of whoever has the most money at stake. And that matters. Because prediction markets only work if people believe that they're betting in a fair market. that the rules are fixed before the bets are placed, and that evidence is evaluated in the same way no matter which side it points to. But Polymarket's outcomes depend on the rules being updated after the bets are placed, or on some group of people with a bunch of tokens deciding what is and isn't true. These markets don't predict anything. They just reward people with deep pockets. So you're not betting on events anymore. You're betting about which whales will influence the outcome and in what direction. And that's why some people are starting to call for a new market.
New prediction alert. Will Polymarket be investigated for insider trading by June 31st?
In the end, all three of these markets resolved, and they all resolved the same way. Not to the clearest evidence, not toward the most consistent interpretation of the rules, not even towards the truth, but towards the side where the most money was. And that tells you everything you need to know about how the system really works and who it's built for.